Okay, here we go. Hello, my name is Toby Voigt. I'm the Chief Curator at the Detroit Historical Society. Today is Saturday, October 10, 2015, and this is the oral history interview of George D. Ramsey Sr. So, welcome, and can we start by, why don't you tell us a little bit about where and when were you born, and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born, ironically, about a miles from here. I was born on Warren Avenue between Hastings and Rivard Street. It's now Chrysler. But anyway, I was born in 1938, April 8, 1938. I lived there for the first 18 years of my life. My first memories of growing up there, ironically, was the riot in 1943. I remember that distinctly because I was 5 years old, and at that time, Detroit had in our backyard, we had a lot of fruit trees, so I was playing in my backyard, and I heard the noise around front. And I ran around front, and my mother was standing on the porch, and I saw this crowd of black men on the other side of Warren Avenue, and they were throwing bricks and whatever's at cars that had, white folks driving in it. And so I stood there, in shock, and then my mother let me go, and she ran down to the sidewalk. A white guy had gotten hit, his car had been hit, and he came out of his car bleeding, and my mother directed him to behind our house. That was the juvenile detention home. Some of it is still there in existence. But she directed him to that to get away from the crowd, and the crowd ran up to my mother, and I distinctly remember this. They said something to my mother, but she said something back to them, and they turned and left. But me at 5 years old, it was embedded in my life, so that was my first memories.
What were you feeling during that, when that was all going on?
I was kind of fearful of you at that instant and I don't remember too much more. I think right after that incident, my mother might have made me go inside the house, but I remember after the riot had subsided, she and I took a walk along Hastings, and because we had lived there for, I guess, 10, 15 years, so my mother was known along the strip there, because my dad was working in the post office, which was pretty good job, obviously, at that time. But he had died in 1940. And so, like I said, we walked along Hastings Street, and then I came on back. But anyway, that was my first memories of growing up in the city of Detroit as a kid. And like I said, I was only less than a mile from the Library, the Art Institute. So my friends now, this is what we did. We spent a lot of time in Detroit in the Institute of Arts. We'd stand there and watch the mummies, of course, a very big exhibit. And the knights, they had the horse, and he had it. I guess that's still in existence at the museum. I haven't been over there in years. But it was so fascinating to me as a kid growing up, and I think that it impacted my life because culturally, I think I'm tuned to that because of how I grew up in the Art Institute, the library.
I'm going to put you in. Hold on. All right, we're rolling.
You want me to just continue to talk? Okay, fine.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Wow. Yeah, so growing up here, like I said, me having been born and I lived in this community, so my friends and I, as a matter of fact, I have a dear friend of mine, he's deceased now, his name was Ron Milner. He was a local playwright, a black playwright, very probably Detroit's most popular playwright as such. But we grew up as kids, went to high school, elementary school together, and we often talked about how important this community was because he became a great writer. We talked about how much time we spent in the library and then Detroit in the institute. Detroit Arts. What we used to call it. What we used to call it. Anyway, but Detroit at that time had almost 2 million people here, so it was quite busy, and we had a lot of activities going on in the neighborhoods, unlike the situation might be now. But I was a paper boy, and when I turned 12, I became a paper boy, and I delivered papers along Hastings Street, which again was the popular street in Detroit for the black community. And I had 2 blocks on Hastings Street was my paper route, and I often talked about the businesses that were there, the black businesses, and how important it was to us culturally. It wasn't a lot of robbery. We had a lot of ways to make money. We call ourselves hustlers, not in the negative sense, because we were always hustling things. That was during the time when we could sell newspapers to the fish markets. This is what they wrap the fish in. We sell coat hangers to the cleaners, where a lot of, you didn't find a lot of glass and materials in the streets, iron, steel, things were still being recycled shortly after the war ended. So we had a lot of ways to make monies and growing up as a kid. Shoe shines, we had a little portable shoe shine stand. We'd walk up and down Woodward Avenue primarily, one of your major thoroughfares, trying to shine shoes. But it was just a lot of activity that was all positive growing up because it stemmed, I think, from the cultural awareness that we had as people growing up then. There was a lot of dancing, a lot of singing, a lot of festivities. It was every week was a reason to celebrate for some reason. So Detroit was very, very, like a very stimulating city, during those years. And for myself, like I said, I just loved being, having said that I was born in Detroit when I ended up in the military. We often talk about how important Detroit was. During the war years, this was the arsenal of democracy, of defense. So I personally took a lot of pride in the fact that I came out of Detroit, especially when I went, like I said, when I went into the military. Because prior to that, during the school years, we celebrated after the war, after the Second World War. On our bikes, we would have flags. People had decorated their cars with flags. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of businesses selling flags. You drive down the street and there was a person had a stand on the street and they were selling flags. It was a very, very enriching time in the history of Detroit. So I'm happy that I'm able to experience that. Like I said, I'm 77 now. I see Detroit, the growth. I see the newness of it. I enjoy it. I relish it, and I welcome the change that's happening. Some people seem to say that it's replacing the old, and that's how life is. The new replaces the old. The young takes the place of the seniors, and this is what our generation has come and gone. And Detroit will be a city that's going to be driven by technology. It's not going to be a city that was driven by just muscles and labor as it was when I was a kid. Again, during my formative years, because up until the 70s, I think it was, the 80s, you could still get jobs in Detroit. There was a lot of industry, but now the technology is taking over. So that's what Detroit has to be in the future. It has to be a town with a technical design and people that can understand the importance of education. So again, I got off.
Oh, sorry.
No, I just understand. I guess we're talking about how Detroit was, and like I said, I experienced the one ride in '43. But when I came out of the service in 1960, I started working in the post office.
Let me ask just that one quick question, kind of going back, because you'd mentioned you were born around Warren and Hastings Street, which is we all know now is the Chrysler Freeway. So how did that? Was your family still living there when that came in? How did that impact your family?
Oh no, well I went into service in 1956, and they were just they had just started demolition. Starting that whole process of demolishing that community. So my mother and them, they moved over on the west side, over by Henry Ford Hospital in 1956. Okay. So that's when the Chrysler Freeway was built during that time. But when they moved over on Kipling Street, 2 blocks from Henry Ford Hospital off West Grand Boulevard and 12th. So when I came back, like I said, in 1967, we called it a ride, but it really was a rebellion because 43, it was a race ride. But in 67, it wasn't a racial ride. It became racial in the sense that the black community was attacked by the police, and you had National Guard men that came in, and they did some things that was uncharacteristic, for law and order people. But anyway, the ride in 67, I remember that, and the irony of that is I was on my porch in 67 with my mother when it first happened, because again it began on 12th Street, which I was only living 2 blocks from 12th Street, but it was a neighborhood a grocery store that was on the Chaldeans owned it at that time. It was on the corner of Poe and Pallister, and that was one of the first stores that was hit that Sunday morning, because that's what they started doing some milling around that Saturday night. My understanding was that Sunday was when it really broke, and like I said, the grocery store around the corner from us was one of the first ones that alarms went off, and then it was a party store on Delaware and Woodrow Wilson, which again is only a couple blocks from where we were standing. That alarm went off, and we noticed that it was raining, and the police were not responding to it. And so myself, I went up on 12th Street. I was sitting in front of St. Agnes Church, which still sits there on the boulevard. Well, it was Rosa Parks, now it was 12th and Pallister. And I was sitting there that Sunday morning, and I was watching the crowd. There was milling. They was coming down. I noticed black and white guys carrying distinctly. Saw them carrying couches down the streets because it was not. The community was integrated. You still had whites and blacks that were living in that community all around 12th Street. So it was not racial in the sense that blacks and whites were attacking one another. It was. They just took over the town. I think it was one of the situations where most of the police department was off enjoying the summer, and it just happened at that time when they could not respond, and then it became racial that Monday. I remember distinctly, like I said, because I was a mailman. I delivered mail out of the North End Post Office, which is it still stands on Milwaukee and Woodward, and my route was down on Leicester, Kenilworth, and Owen. I delivered from Woodward to Oakland. But my friend, another friend of mine, his route was on Virginia Park, and that was where they had the infamous Algiers Motel. This is where the police officers killed these three black men, and in the motel there. And that Monday, like I think they shot these boys that Sunday. Because, as they said, that they found them in a room with some white girls from Toledo, Ohio, I think it was. But anyway, the police officers, August, Praley, and Sensitic, I believe that was in there. I remember the officer August distinctly because on my route, there was a school down on Leicester. I think that's what the school, Alger School. And the National Guard had their equipment there on the school grounds, and these police officers were there protecting them from that standpoint. But August, these guys were police officers, and I remember that Monday when I saw him, it was that Tuesday, because we didn't deliver mail that Monday after the riot. So that Tuesday, when I went in to deliver mail, I saw it, and I remembered his face because they publicized him all during the time when they investigated the killing, but it was it was horrendous the way that they did these guys, because one of the boys' body was on my route at the funeral home. They're on Wilson Funeral Home on Owens and the Brush, I think it was. But the undertaker there, he told me how the boy's body was. He said they shot down. He said the boy was laying down, was on his knees in the begging position. It's because he shot through his arms, sand through his groin down into his into his private areas. And but anyway, it was just terrible. That was the worst thing about the riot from my standpoint. But another thing that I had on my route, there was a fellow named J. Edward Bailey. I think that was his name. He was a black photographer, and he worked for Detroit News. And a friend of mine who was co-worker that Monday after the riot, we didn't have to work that day. We came to the post office and they told us we could go home, etc. So this friend of mine, he had a car. I think he had a Ford. He had a convertible. So we got in his car and we decided to ride down 12th Street. Because everything had subsided. They came in and the police. And so we were riding down the 12th Street. And I saw Mr. Bailey walking, and I knew that he was a photographer. And I called him. He came, got in this friend of mine's car. And what we did, he had the convertible, and so Bailey was able to sit in his back seat and take shots until some guy saw us and he told us to stop because they said it would be kind of dangerous. But anyway, so Bailey got out the car and we left and we went in and drove around the city just looking at some of the scenes. But anyway, Mr. Bailey ended up winning some award for he had some of the best pictures that was taken of the riot. And I quit shortly after the riot. I resigned from the post office, but prior to me resigning, when he found out that he made the award, I joked and told him that he needed to give me some of that money that he made. But so those were some of the major memories that I have of the riot. Again, is that Algiers Motel incident and having one of the boys' bodies was on my route. I didn't view it but again, it was not a race riot. It was a rebellion. It definitely was rebellion. And a lot of the incidents that happened, from my understanding, is that a lot of the store owners set those buildings on fire. They set their own because it was an insurance factor. As an example, I had on my route, there was a pawn shop that was on the corner of Owens and Oakland. And as mailman, oftentimes I needed some money, so I'd go. I had a little diamond ring. I would pawn my little ring, and I'd get it out. And just so happened I had pawned my ring prior to the riot. And when I went back there that Tuesday to get it, the pawn guy, he said that.
Oh, sorry, I thought I slammed.
Yeah, he said that my ring, I lost my ring in the riot. So I mean that happened. I couldn't tell him. Because he had insurance that would cover his losses, and a lot of the things that people supposedly lost, they kept themselves, and a lot of the pawn shops.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
But his store was still standing. He just said he was looted.
Right.
Yeah.
He said that when he came in, and it might have happened, I don't know, but I'm saying I know I lost my little diamond ring.
Oh,
I didn't
no.
do any looting. I got looted, But it was a lot. But I mean, I knew people that supposedly got a lot of loot out of it. And some guys that a friend of mine said that they were driving down Grand River around Oakland, I think, Oakland Boulevard, and when they got right there at that corner, some people broke into, it was a jewelry store, Myers, I think it was. And so they said they parked the car, went in there and looted also. So it was a lot of that happened like that. It was a lot of looting done in the early parts of the day, but I know that they talked about snipers. I know it was the only snipers, actual snipers that they took out of there were some white guys that was on the corner of, they had a house over there on I think it was Euclid and LaSalle Boulevard. I mean, it was a nice, stately home, and they had tanks in front of this house, in order, because these guys had some weapons that made, they didn't have like shotguns. I mean, these guys had rifles at that time, and it was unusual. But it was not a lot of black snipers going. And you hit somebody, you heard people talking about snipers, but I don't think that they could convince me that there was black snipers. Might have been someone up there trying to, but I know that was one group of, and these were some white guys that were radicalized, because you had in Detroit at the time you had called the White Panthers, who were similar to the Black Panthers. They were, and so they were challenged the community. I'm not saying that these folks were, but what I'm saying is that you had a lot of radical white guys, and John Sinclair. These guys came out of the same struggle that a lot of blacks came out, and they had a lot of philosophies.
Yeah.
That was. One incident, one thing about the riot that been characterized as a sniping, and that it was not a race riot.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'd like to know a little bit more about you. You mentioned that it's not a race riot, but you've mentioned a couple of times that it was a rebellion. Can you talk a little bit about what made it a rebellion?
Yeah, it was true. It was because again, they had a group of police officers called Stress, Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets, and the concept was good. Like they need something on that order now. But anyway, and these guys, their primary jobs. I think one of the police officers' name was Peterson. I think he ended up shooting 3 or 4, 5 people. But what they would do, they would just the police would take advantage of us in many ways. That was one, and the stress was one way they would to try to set you up. To even if you stopped asking for a cigarette, you could be accused of attempted robbery and you get shot there. I mean, these things happened, you know. And it wasn't, I mean, like every day to some people, you know, but it certainly happened. And police, were doing the same kind of things then that you hear about police officers doing now, with the exception of they're killing more blacks and now shooting blacks. But black, I mean, they took advantage of us, you know, to a black male, you know, and we didn't have a lot of black police officers at that time. Because at one point, we had an incident over there on the east side of the Detroit police station over on Jefferson. This is after the riot, when some black police officers challenged some white police officers how they were brutalized the prisoners. So that was one of the things that came out of the riot, is that we ended up getting more blacks on the police force. Because I know it that when I was working in the post office, 3 guys that I worked with, they resigned from post office and got on the police force.
Really?
Oh yeah, because it was very important. Our generation to go out on the police ourselves, you know. Unlike now, it seems like it's not you don't seem to have that same kind of attitude about the police department. You have complaints about your police department, then you should want to police your own community. And that was what was happening, because again, we were coming out of the, you know, revolutionary mindset supposedly, and that was one of the things. The self-governance, you know, is who you want to police you, you know, and so that was one of the factors, some of the factors that led to the riot, because folks were working, you know, there were jobs, it was plentiful. I mean, you know, you could get a job here, but it was just the brutality that was being inflicted on us, and the lack of movement. You know, you were restricted in a lot of ways to certain areas only, but. You know, it never was like a racial riot. It definitely was a rebellion, because folks were upset. You know, I would say, very much so.
So you were, so you had mentioned that you went into service in '56, and you got out in '60.
Mm-hmm.
Then you came back and started working for the post office.
Exactly.
Were you living with your mother, or you?
Mm-hmm, yes, right. Because I didn't get married until I was 60 years old. You know, I had kids out of wedlock. But but I stayed with my mom, because we had a 2-family flat and had a 3rd attic apartment. You know, which was great for me, because I mean, I was single. I didn't want the expense of a house. And then after I started working in the post office, then I started working at Motown. I left the post office in '67. I went to school. I went out to Fleetwood and got injured. Then I started attending Wayne County Community College. I graduated, and I moved out to California. I worked at Motown, you know, for
Motown when it was in California, or Motown
well, no,
here?
I started here, yeah.
What'd you do at Motown?
I was just the road manager for some recording artists.
You were just the road manager.
Oh yeah, right. Right. Yeah.
Oh,
but I enjoyed, which was great, because like I said, having grew up and been around so much music culture, that was what I gravitated toward. You know, I was always singing, and I played in my high school band, sung in this choir. And I came out of Northeastern High School that I referred to as Motown University, simply because so many artists from Motown went to Northeastern. Barry Gordy had attended. I don't think he graduated. But it was always, and like I said, this fellow Ron Milner, the guy whom I spoke of earlier today, we talked about the fact that even he was a writer, and he wrote at Motown for a while, but Barry Gordy, Motown started right around the corner from my house on San Edwine. It ended up moving to the Boulevard, but Barry Gordy's first business was right in this neighborhood here. You know, this is where this all started. It's all about the culture. This is what Motown came out of, the cultural community of Detroit. See, it didn't just spring out of nowhere. There was a reason, in my opinion, that Motown, because there was a theater called the Warfield Theater. It was comparable to the Apollo.
Sure.
Barry Gordy, I think Barry played piano there on one of the amateur shows there. And Hastings Street, and his father, they were business. The Gordy's family were business folks. You know, so there's a lot of reasons for, I think, Motown developed in this community. You know, because again, it was part of which is right now they call it the cultural center. But back then it was just the neighborhood. But yeah.
So you started with Motown after '67?
Yeah, right. When I started working, because the fellow that a friend of mine was singing post office, his name was Freddie Gorman, and Freddie was mailman. He and I was in the high school band together, and he was one of the writers on the song "Please, Mr. Postman." He wrote that while we were carrying
Really?
mail, and he started singing in the group, the Originals. They had some songs that moderate successes, and so he asked me to come work with him after I quit the post office. And I said, well, okay. I thought about it, and I went out there with the guys, and I loved it, fell in love with it because it kept me close to the music, and I enjoyed that role that I played, and then I did that for like 2-3 years with them. Then my son was born, and I went back to school. That's when I went to school. My son was born, and I stayed there for a couple of years, and then when they moved out to California, they asked me to come move out there with them, and I went out there with them, and I started working with Lamont Dozier of Holland Dozier Holland fame. You know, I lived with Lamont and worked as his road manager. You know.
Wow.
So it was just, it's just great. I mean, but it all started from right there, the Culture Center, where we are now. You know, kind of like fed it.
Any really good road stories of being on the road with the?
Oh yeah. And some things. One story I like to tell. First time we went to New York with these guys. We were playing no, this was in Newark, New Jersey, and we were playing at this guy. He had a bar, and so the original my job as the road manager. You know, normally I just sit in the dressing room, but this guy had an office. He didn't have a dressing room. And so the guys had to change clothes there, and one door in, one door out, and so they went out there and they when they were getting ready to perform, but before they performed, they had a shake dancer on the show, you know, female shake dancer. So when she finished acting, the guys went out there and they did their show, and so we're sitting there. I was sitting there, and she walked in and disrobed and started drying her clothes with a towel. Well, I had never been around nothing like this before, so I saw a champagne bottle, and I picked the champagne bottle up and poured me a shot. And I threw it down the drink, but it was champagne cologne.
Oh!
So they started calling me Champagne Ram after that, you know. But, I mean, you know, it's a lot of different things. Some things that I can't talk about.
For sure.
But, yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. And, like I said, when I lived out there with Lamont Dozier, he was, you know, Holland Dozier, Holland fame, and he exposed me to a lot of activities that I normally wouldn't have seen. Got a chance to go to Hugh Hefner's house. Aretha Franklin cooked the dinner for us.
Oh my gosh!
That Boss Skaggs, Henry Mancini. I mean, it's just so many folks, you know, that I was able to say that I was in their company, you know, to have Henry Mancini say it was nice meeting you, George. You know,
oh my gosh!
Come on, Hank. You know. So, but yeah, I have a lot of lot of good memories about you know, my life at this stage, and I'm writing about these things, you know, that I'm sharing with you. So it's that's why I'm so enthused about what you're doing here. I think that it's great for you to encourage folks to talk about the ride and other aspects of their lives as such, you know. So.
Okay, so you were in California. How did you get back? I mean, you're here, so.
Well, I fell out, you know, the guys, you know, like I said, my youngest son, I had 2 boys, and my youngest son, I had him out to California with me when he was 5. I thought that his mom was going to let him stay out there with me, but she wouldn't. She wanted, you know, me to bring him back, and I brought him back, and I really, you know, really didn't want to, because I enjoyed being a father. My dad had died when I was 2, so I really missed that aspect. So I stayed out there for them till he turned 7. No. Yeah, he's 6 or 7. Anyway, so I just had to come on back. I came on back here, you know, to be with my son, and then I'm happy that I did, of course, you know. So. But and then I was disappointed at the guys because I didn't move out to California. I memean, you enjoy the sights, and back then, during the 70s, it was a much different community, a much different world even. But like I say, I was always wanting to do something that was a little more, I guess, satisfying to me. Once they stopped traveling, they didn't want to travel. they didn't want to sing, and I said, well, let me come back to Detroit. A friend of mine that had a television show, and I started working with him because I used to work with some folks that were developing television. WGPR, the television station.
Was this WGPR TV?
Yeah, was just getting started then. So I had an opportunity. I had gotten a third-class broadcast license. I had a license, so it kind of like fit right in. And the entertainment background that I had, so I was always wanting to do something with television and things. And when I was in California, see, I was in the minority writers workshop when I was out in California. Warner Brothers sponsored it. And Lamont Dozier, he ended up marrying a woman named Barbara, and she had been a secretary at Warner Brothers, and one of her jobs was reviewing the scripts. And so she and I, she knew my she knew that I'd been writing a little bit, so she convinced me to first sit down and try to do a movie, write a movie. So we did that, and we got it with the library, with the Writers Guild. It's registered with the Writers Guild, but we never did anything with it. But I enjoyed that, I enjoyed that writing, and I enjoyed things of that nature. Like, enjoyed what you're doing, enjoying that. So, like I said, I've just had a great life,
How long were you at GPR?
Well, I wasn't with them. I worked with,
you worked. Okay.
No, the fellow that I worked with named Jim Ingram. He had a television show that aired on WGPR years ago, and which was great because we interviewed Rosa Parks. We interviewed a lot of interviews because Jim was very articulate guy, very community oriented. He had been third deputy chief of police. He was one of Coleman Young's earlier supporters. So I was on his coattail, So he had a great show. Great television show, and then Jim died unexpectedly in 1994. But so I came back to get involved with what was happening here in Detroit. Like I said, I love it. That's why I love what you're doing and what's happening here in the city of Detroit. The future looks good.
Good. Anything else that you want to share? Any thoughts about today, or lessons learned, if any, from 1967? Or
well, again, I think that the thing that I hope that what came out of that is, even with this turbulent times that we're going through now, that it's still, Detroit is still a great city. Just as America is still a great place to be. And when I joined the military, I was, as a matter of fact, the interview that I'm doing through the Library of Congress, I told them I didn't join the Air Force, which I did for 4 years. I didn't join it because I was black. I joined it because I was an American. And that's how I view myself, and that's how I view everybody that's part of Detroit or anywhere else is being Americans, and I'm just pulling for America.
That's great.
So.
Well, I don't have any more questions for you.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, I really like what we did. I hope that